people definitely do feel entitled to ask why, entitled to ask a lot of things about why
Yeah.
we're not, or when that will change our mind. People have a
Yeah.
lot of opinions on the fact that we only have one, and
Mhm.
it didn't surprise me because I know that that's the natural inclination. I mean, we don't even refer to it as when you have kid. It's when you have kids. It's
Absolutely.
always an
Yeah.
assumption that once you have one, you will have two or more. So I understand people's natural curiosity. They probably just naturally think that that's where we're headed. But yeah, so it has been very interesting to see how people react when we say, no, we're good and we're happy with one, and that's the decision we've made.
I'm Keltie McGuire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. Hello and welcome to the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. Today, we actually have our first Australian guest on the podcast. And, I've got to say, you may or may not know this about my story, but I have a special spot in my heart for Australia and Australians because I actually spent about a year and a half living there, pre-life in Vancouver with Chris. Actually, just before I moved back and met my husband, I had lived in Australia, and it is such a beautiful place, and the people are a lot of fun, very lovely. And so I was super happy, and you'll hear a little bit actually about how I connected with this guest in today's episode, but was very excited to have today's guest, Stacey, on because we're going to have our first very in-depth conversation about being a mom to one, being one and done, making the decision to have a kid, but not kids. And so, although we've had a number of guests on the podcast who have had one child and who've spoken to this to some degree, I wanted to do a deep dive because I think a lot of people who are on the fence are thinking like, if I had kids, it would probably actually be kid. And they want to know what it is like being a parent to one child. We also sometimes have this idea that like it's a nice compromise between being child-free and having multiple kids. I do ask Stacey in the episode, is it more like being child-free? Is it more like being a parent to multiples? What do you think? So I had my suspicions on what she might answer, but you're going to hear about that and much more. So let me tell you a little bit about today's guest. Stacey Hicks is the deputy editor for Australia's largest women's media company, Mamamia. After working in magazines for a decade, Stacey made the switch to digital, where she loves sharing women's stories across news, lifestyle, and parenting. She's also the mom to a glorious 4-year-old girl with her husband, who she met in her first media job working at the local newspaper. Stacey, thank you so much for being here. And I am really glad you're here and that I was able to sort of turn around the ask after you and I connected for a piece you were working on for Mamamia Australia. You mentioned sort of sideways that you are probably one and done as far as having kids. And of course that intrigued me. And I said, come on the podcast and let's talk about it. So thank you so much for being here. Why don't, to kick us off, you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Of course. Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm glad that we could do this around the other way. I am always the one doing the interviewing. So it's very strange to be talking about myself. But I am a journalist from Sydney, Australia. I share a lot of women's stories on Mamamia. I'm the deputy editor there. So we're the largest women's media company, sharing the stories of all different kinds of women. So I loved chatting to you about your decision to be child-free and getting to that decision. And obviously intrigued me because you know that I am most likely, probably, definitely, depending on the minute, only having one child. And that does spark a lot of questions from people in the same way that it does when you decide to be child-free, weirdly. It's quite a similar
Yeah,
reaction that you can get from people. So that's how we connected.
totally. Yeah, I've noticed quite a few and like increasingly a lot of parallels between being on the fence and having one child, even when you are totally clear and firm on that decision. And I also appreciate that a lot of the people I talk to, once I kind of like get behind the scenes a little bit, there sometimes is this hesitation of like, is this really it? Are we having one child and we're not going to have more? Are we sure? And there can be this back and forth. And so I think it's highly relatable. I also know that a lot of the people I've spoken to who've especially been on the fence for some time, both because of the reluctance and uncertainty around what life will be like with kids, there's definitely a pull towards, okay, if I do it, it would be one child. I also think when we, for various reasons, these decisions become postponed until a little bit later in life, for a lot of people, it's like at this stage, I wouldn't probably either be able to or feel like it's really likely to have more than one child, which is interestingly something I related to when my husband and I were on the fence. I remember saying to him, like, if we did have kids, it would be kid. And I felt quite clearly about that. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I, of course, I mean, you mentioning all the writing you do for Mamamia, I was like perusing your articles yesterday and I was reading about like the Dubai chocolate was an article, a funny one that stood out because we were at a friend's place recently. And people, if you don't know the Dubai chocolate hype, you're just going to have to Google it. But I'd seen these signs popping up around the city of like places that have Dubai chocolate or things made with Dubai chocolate. But we went to friends who had just been there and they explained this, like this Dubai chocolate, which, I mean, you can, we don't, is it so good? Is it so good?
It is so good. I love chocolate to begin with, but this chocolate was life-changing, but you would want it to be because it's the most stressful process to get the original over there. You can only order it on one delivery service at a certain time of day, and there's a limit, and we missed out the first day we tried, but we got it on the second day. It's the most expensive chocolate I've ever eaten, but also the best chocolate I've ever eaten. So, yeah, if you ever go there, if you ever find yourself there, you've definitely got to try it.
I remember hearing about the cost and I felt like it was really generous of our friends to offer us some. So
yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, those hard-hitting topics aside, let's talk.
I was about to say, I do a broad range.
She does. It's
chocolate.
Not just yeah. But these like cultural pieces are fun, I find, and they're fun to read, and they're an interesting commentary. I think that we can connect back to like a lot of bigger things in life. So, okay. So tell me, Stacey, I'm curious, did you always know that you wanted to be a mom? And how did you come to that decision? Or if you knew you wanted to, how did you know you were ready to like take that step forward?
I was thinking about this before, and I don't actually know if I ever thought about there actually being another option until we started trying for a child, to be honest. I think I was your classic, people-pleasing, perfectionist, type A, oldest daughter type. And it was always kind of just assumed that you grow up, you get a job, you meet someone, you get married and you have a baby. And that kind of did happen in that, obviously, in that traditional sense for me, in that when I met my partner, we always talked about, when we have kids, not if we have kids. And it was really only when we got to the stage of deciding that we were kind of at that life stage. We'd been married for about 5 years. We'd done a lot of the travel that we wanted to do. We were at a good spot in our careers that we decided to have a family, to start a family. And that was a long journey for us. That took 2 years to have our daughter, who's 4 now. And it was almost the longer that went on, the more the question entered your head, because it felt like for the first time, there's a possibility here that maybe we won't be parents, or maybe that won't happen as easily for us. So we need to be sure that this is what we want to do if we're going down this route, and if it's going to take medical intervention. It didn't for us. We were very lucky in that way. But is this what we really want? And of course, when we found out we were having our daughter, we were thrilled and shocked and all the things that it actually happened for us. But yeah, it was always an assumption, but it definitely became something that we really thought through very thoroughly once we were at that stage. And I'm almost glad in a way that we did have that time, because then when we did find out we were having our daughter, it really was, she was just so wanted. Like we were just so thrilled to have her.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. And I'm glad to hear like the reframing of that it brought a different level of like intentionality behind it. And I also can appreciate the, like how challenging that is to feel like you've made a decision and then you're deciding again and again and again, right? And that there can be additional decisions as far as, okay, to what degree do we pursue this and what means would we take to have a child? And I think that's something a lot of people don't expect, right? They look at it as like more of a black and white decision when there can be so many decisions both within having a child. And then once you have a kid or kids, there's of course so many decisions that come up around how you're going to raise them. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that always surprises me so much when people say, so when are you having the second? Is that there's that assumption that I could click my fingers and that could happen.
Yeah.
I know lots of people who experience secondary infertility. So it's not a given that even if I wanted to, that I would be able to have a second. It's so lucky and such a, it's a cheesy term, but it is such a miracle every time that that happens. So that definitely plays in as well, that you might have children later than you originally intended. You might not want to go to those measures to have a child,
Yeah.
or you might not be able to afford to go to those measures.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things to play into that
Absolutely.
decision. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And for some people, it just feels like one child, like just simply is that right path for them. But I think, especially if there are those additional layers or complications, it's similar with asking someone when they're going to have kids, period. It's
Yeah.
really, it's one that I don't want to say we should never ask anyone that. Of course, it probably depends on quite a few different things, but it's something we should be definitely careful about. And I'm curious, do you feel like people are pretty off the cuff, sort of flippant as far as like they feel like they can just ask you about your reproductive choices? Is that what I'm hearing, even
Yes.
after having had a child?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. It was beforehand as well, I guess, because we were at that point where we'd been married for a couple of years and we'd kind of
Mm-hmm.
probably always indicated that that is the path that we would
Yeah.
go down. Like we were never staunch that we didn't want children at that
Yeah.
point. But yeah, people definitely do feel entitled to ask why, entitled to ask a lot of things about why
Yeah.
we're not, or when we that will change our mind. People have a
Yeah.
lot of opinions on the fact that we only have one, and
Mm-hmm.
it didn't surprise me because I know that that's the natural inclination. I mean, we don't even refer to it as when you have kid. It's when you have kids. It's
Absolutely.
always an
Yeah.
assumption that once you have one, you will have two or more. So I understand people's natural curiosity. They probably just naturally think that that's where we're headed. But yeah, so it has been very interesting to see how people react when we say, no, we're good and we're happy with one, and that's the decision we've made.
So I'm curious, like, after you had your daughter, how soon after would you say people made comments or questions about, and are you going to have another child?
I would say as early as about 3 months.
Okay.
Like when we were having initial, seeing people out and about, probably for the
Yeah.
first time since having her, people did raise it at that point and say, "Oh, I bet you're so excited to have another one," or "So when do you think you'll have another one?" And
Yeah.
for me, like I had quite a traumatic birth. It
Okay.
was a bit kind of stressful at the end of of my pregnancy,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt like I was still recovering from that and really like recalibrating as a person and
Yeah.
now as a mother. So I found that so jarring that people would even think to ask at that point. But it's interesting. I don't know whether it was because it was hard, like that
Mm-hmm.
we had a hard delivery and postpartum
Yeah.
initially with her. She was quite preemie, not
Okay.
quite preemie, but a little bit preemie.
Yeah.
So we were in hospital for a bit of an extended stay. And I don't know whether that played into it, but I did feel quite content that that was it, even that early on, which people thought would change. And a lot of my close
Okay.
friends who I spoke to more openly about this stuff, and of course was kind of
Yeah.
happy to have that conversation with, would say, "Oh, it's just because you're in the trenches at the moment. You'll change your mind once she's older. You'll definitely want more. Like you're made for this. You should do this. Of
Yeah.
course, you should have more." And that was all beautiful and super well intentioned. But my feeling on that has never changed more than about
Yeah.
10% towards having another.
Okay.
It has always felt that she has completed our family and that we
Yeah.
do feel happy with what we've got now. I
Yeah.
mean, of course, there's days you'll see a cute baby, or our daughter will be, playing something on her own that we think, "Oh, how nice would that be if she had someone to play with her," where you do have those little thoughts of,
Yeah.
"Oh, we better have another one. We should have another one." But it's never, for us at least, it's never verged more into we're definitely doing it. It's
Yeah.
never kind of crossed that borderline to
Okay.
to to either of us.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing, it sounds like, I mean, before having your daughter, had you maybe similarly assumed that you would have a bigger family, more kids? What was that discussion like? And then do you remember afterwards you and your husband saying, "Oh yeah, this feels like we're good"? Or was that more you saying, "I'm good"?
Yeah, no, I think it was both of us.
Yeah.
I can't remember what I thought. I think I assumed I would probably have two. I think that is
Hmm.
probably what I thought because I grew up with a brother.
Hmm.
My husband has a half sister who's much older than him. So he essentially grew up as an only child, but does have a sibling as well.
Yeah.
So I think we thought, that you have two and that's what you do.
Hmm.
But yeah, we both just had this sense of this is this is good. And, depending on the day, sometimes you have bad days where you go, this is more than enough. I could not
This is
possibly
one too many.
handle
No, just kidding.
another. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just think I could not handle another in this
Yeah.
mix. And I would just look at my friends with two or three. I
Yeah.
still do, in absolute awe of how they parent those children.
Hmm.
But for us, it just feels like the right thing. We have a
Yeah.
nice, peaceful household where we get to focus
Yeah.
on that one beautiful little girl, and that feels more than good enough for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hear a lot of confidence in this, like, yep, this is right for us. This feels right. And at the same time, I know how much these other comments that people make, and even our own feelings can sort of like niggle away at us. Interesting, this comment of, you're made for this, you're going to want more. Of course, you'll want more kids. It is, I'm sure anybody listening will feel like it is so familiar for anyone who is either suggested they might not want children or who has made that decision. This is like the narrative all the time, right? You're going to change your mind. Of course you
Yeah.
want kids. Why are you saying this? Essentially, you're made for this. How have you contended with those kinds of comments and like allowed yourself to figure out what's yours versus what somebody else's, what your truth is versus what someone else might want for you?
Yeah. I think that is the hardest thing. And I think
Yeah.
that is the reason I still think about it so often
Yeah.
because we do feel quite clear in that decision. But of course, we don't live in a vacuum, and
Yeah.
I definitely don't. I deeply care what other people think in all aspects of my life. So it naturally creeps into this one as
Yeah.
well. And you do think, what if they're right? What if she'll hate me for this later? What if we'll regret this later
Yeah.
and feel really sad about this when it's past the point of no return? There's a lot of there's a lot of things like that come into play, and there's a lot of noise
Yeah.
around it. So it is hard. Like I won't pretend that there's not days where I don't feel sad about it.
Hmm.
But that's more. Yeah, it has been definitely a process of figuring out what's what I'm feeling inside and what's
Yeah.
the feelings I'm taking in from the outside, from friends, from family. Of course, no one would ever put pressure on us. Everyone is incredibly supportive, but you
Mm.
know that they would love if you had another baby. If there was
Yeah.
another baby around, they would be welcomed into your life and into your family and your social circle. So
Yeah.
it is really hard to kind of make that decision for yourself
Hmm.
and go, I'm not taking on these external pressures. And I'm sure it feels even more so like that when you're deciding not to have children at all.
Yeah.
That would be really hard, even harder, I think,
Yeah.
than yeah.
I think, though, the fact you're facing these and you have a child, it's a good reminder for people that sometimes we can feel pressured to do something based on these external voices, and that we feel like if we just relent, then they won't be a problem anymore. But I think it's a good example
Yeah.
of the fact that like people are always going to have their opinions. They're always going to see things. And I don't think I don't want to frame it as selfishness, but we see things from a point of reference of ourselves, right? Like if, for
Yeah.
example,
Yeah.
grandparents are going to like naturally think it would probably be cool to have another grandchild, right? Friends, especially friends of multiple children, probably would love for you to then have multiple children as well. And I don't think it's ill-intentioned, but it is a reminder. And what you describe as yourself, I hear from my clients all the time. I'm not sure if it's just like what it is to be a woman, but this notion, especially, you're talking about eldest daughter, like right here, perfectionist, people pleaser, those things really come up when we're facing this decision. And it's going to come up in your parenting decisions as well. Never mind having more than one child, right? Like I'm sure you must have to contend with that, other people's inputs.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think like one thing I've said to people jokingly
Yeah.
is, okay, will you be there to change the nappies? Will you be
Yeah.
there when that needs to be done? Because unless you will be, it's not really something that you
Yeah.
get to have input on. And I think that's something I think about a lot is like who would we be doing that for and why
Yeah.
would we be doing that? And I think one of the things that comes up for both of us is
Mm-hmm.
that we worry that the only person we actually deep down care about the opinion of is our daughter,
Yeah.
and whether it's the right choice for her. And so I think it's natural that you do think, oh, she hate us for this later.
Yeah.
Will she feel lonely in her life, and we could have done something to change that? Will this
Mm.
shape her personality in a way that's not best for her? Would she be better off if there was a sibling here, to learn to share with,
Yeah.
to have the company of? There's so many questions like that you bring on, but
Yeah.
none of them are really concrete. Like
Okay. Yeah.
they're all something that she could probably feel if there was a sibling here too. or
Totally.
or that there would be an opposite if there was a sibling. Like she might think, I never got your time or your focus, or I had to share everything with this younger person, or just wanted to be on my own and they were always there. Like, I guess there's no way to know.
Yeah.
So we would be making that decision for the wrong reason. That's what
Yeah.
I kind of keep coming back to with it.
Yeah. I think it's powerful that you're questioning those assumptions that you or anyone else might have, right? Like, and you don't know what it would be like if you had another child, but even the idea like, well, it's like a bestie and a support system. And when you get older, it's like a lot of people don't have great relationships with their siblings, or there may be estrangement, or even in the case of a wonderful relationship, like you say, there's just so many variables and factors. And so, good for you for really like feeling like, that I would be making a decision based on like maybes and like lack of
Yeah.
certainty versus
Well, I think you
what I
actually
know.
helped me with that a bit
Really?
when I interviewed you for Mamamia. You probably didn't even realize, but when
No,
we
I didn't.
spoke about when we
Yeah.
spoke about the decision to have children or not have children,
Yeah.
and you were saying, one of the reasons that people tell you that you maybe should have children is that you would feel lonely later on in your life. And you
Yeah.
used the example of your own family, and that someone could have multiple children that then go to live in different countries,
Yeah.
and they definitely still feel loneliness even though they have children. So you're not
Absolutely.
actually protecting yourself from that feeling. Like, there's no guarantee that you
Yeah.
wouldn't feel those feelings if you had a child
Yeah.
or you didn't. And I
Yeah.
felt like that was very applicable to having a second as well. Was like, well, having a second doesn't guarantee that both of them wouldn't move away from me, or both of them
Yeah.
wouldn't get along with one another. That's not their role in life. So
Yeah.
they have to live their own life. So yeah, that actually really helped me when
Aw,
you said that.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting. I've had like increasing numbers of people who've sort of floated this idea with me of like, oh, would you help people who have had one and are maybe thinking about more, or how to sort of contend with like what is still considered like, I actually am curious, and that's a sidebar question I'll ask you in a second, but like the prevalence of having only child, a solo child, if you will. But it still is sort of going against the grain and norms. And so, yeah, I mean, I'd be interested if anyone's listening has an only child and relates both to Stacey's story, but also if this is something you've grappled with. Absolutely. It's something I think a lot of the questions we would ask ourselves and the way we approach things are very similar to when we're on the fence between having none and kid or kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you know how commonplace it is? And I'm curious in your own circle, like, do most of your friends, A, are most of them parents, and B, do they have more than one child, or what's, and yeah, I guess two parts, like broadly speaking, because I know you also have, I think, like interviewed other guests or done a little bit of research on this. How many people are having only one child? And
Yeah.
then,
So
yeah.
the rate of only children is higher than it's ever been now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is probably to do with a lot of things. People having children later,
Yeah.
people having children on their own, and that suits their family best. And just having the choice, like having the option and thinking about it
Yeah.
a bit more. The cost, I mean, cost of living is just crazy. And
Mm-hmm.
every child that you add is another expense. And I've definitely seen that has been something I thought about was, will I be the only person who's got an only child, and will everyone
Mm-hmm.
else have multiple? And definitely in my close circle of friends, they all have multiple. But even my daughter at her gymnastics class, her little best friend that she made, and she's very much an introvert, loves her own company, friends are optional to her. She loves kind of her own space and her own make believe games that she plays, but she really gravitated towards this little girl who's now her best friend. And she's an only child. And as
Oh,
soon as her mum and
interesting.
I started talking, she said, oh yeah, we're done. We're having one. So that's been kind of lovely. Like, I think the more I look out for it, the more I
Yeah.
see people who are only having one, whether that's by choice or whether that's by circumstance. But
Yeah.
definitely, from the research I've
Hmm.
seen, it's more common than it ever has been.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested. I mean, you hear and we know about sort of these stereotypes, right? Of, oh, the only child is selfish. The only child is spoiled. The
Mm.
only child doesn't know how to connect with others. And then, of course, the worries. And when you're older and later in life, and who will, I don't need to hammer them in once more. I'm sure you're well versed in them.
No.
What would you say? Is there one that you hear most commonly and or one that bothers you the most?
Yeah, yeah. Look, I hear them all mostly from my own brain at 2 a.m.,
Okay.
when
Yeah.
I'm spiraling. But the main one is that she'll be lonely. Like, that
Mm-hmm.
is the thing I've kind of, no one said that to me outright, but it's
Yeah.
always kind of, oh, you can't do that. You need her to have a friend. You need her to have
Mm.
a sibling. It's kind of the implication that she'll be disadvantaged by not having another
Yeah.
kid here. But I mean, she's only 4. She's kind of at the point where at best she would probably have a 1-year-old sibling, if
Mm-hmm.
that. Like, a lot of people have a bigger gap than that. But her personality is so perfectly suited to being an only
Yeah.
child. She loves her own company. She loves doing imaginary games.
Hmm.
She loves having our attention, and us being involved in those games.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would definitely say that the loneliness part is part of it. My biggest worry is probably the socialization part of it.
Okay.
But I think that's just something that you'd be conscious of. Of course, if she was just
Yeah.
always with us and never around other children, then that may become a problem. But she's goes to preschool 3 days a week. She has little friends from my friend group that we regularly see. And so she gets those interactions every
Yeah.
single day. She loves to go to our
Yeah.
neighbor's house to play with their daughter, who's a few years older. So, yeah, she definitely gets to have those things, but it's definitely something that we're conscious of and making
Yeah.
sure that we're kind of compensating for that.
Yeah. Well, and I think having that sort of intentionality, it's something that can easily be overlooked if you have that assumption that like everything's good because you have multiples. And so I think if anything, she's yeah, because you're really like doubling down to make sure like, oh, I want to make sure my child also thinks of others and that they're able to interact with kids. It's like those things can probably be overlooked if you maybe don't have a solo child. So I would say there's probably a lot of benefits.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the biggest benefit that we both see with her is
Yeah.
that we can give her that focus and attention.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a terrible multitasker. If you spoke to me while I was texting, I would not hear what you said. I
Yeah.
just can't do that. Like I see other mothers do. And I just
Yeah.
love that I get to have that quality time with her. And because it is 2-on-1, that you do get more time to go and pursue your own interests or spend time with friends or with family, and that they get to spend one-on-one time with you, which I know in families
Yeah.
where there's a lot of children, it's just not possible. Like, you
Mm.
can't do that, and you are completely splitting focus all the time.
Yeah.
So we're very lucky in that way. Like, I would say that is one of the biggest advantages of having one, is that we're
Yeah.
able to give her that.
The time has come. The next round, the summer session of my Kids Are Child-Free group coaching program, is kicking off on June 18th. Now, can you just imagine if rather than spending your time and energy this summer ruminating on this Kids Are Child-Free choice, being awake in the wee hours thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm closing in on my 35th birthday, my 38th, my 40th, what have you. I know how it goes. Imagine if instead you got to really enjoy this summer. You could be out paddleboarding on the lake, or you could enjoy backyard drinks with friends, knowing that you have a plan in place and that you are going through a process to figure out whether Kids or Child-Free is the choice for you. Well, if you join our Kids or Child-Free group program summer session, you're in store for just that, because you're going to, over the course of 12 weeks, in a group of like-minded women, be guided on a journey to take you from confusion to clarity on your kids or child-free choice. If that sounds all kinds of incredible, you're going to want to check out the details, which I will share in the show notes of today's episode. Again, this is my 12-week kids or child-free group coaching program. We are kicking things off June 18th. And you, of course, can also find details over at kidsorchildfree.com under the Work With Me tab. If somebody was thinking about having an only child, is this the term, by the way? Is it solo child, only child, one child? Can we say is it all interchangeable?
All fine with me. If someone wants to let me know the preferred term, but I'm fine with any of it.
I wasn't sure if there was like a politically correct term that we use.
Triangle family. I've heard lots of different terms for it.
Or saw you say that. That's cute. I like triangle family. Okay. Would you say with having a triangle family that aside from these worries in your mind and what other people say, like, are there any disadvantages from where you stand today that you would say like, or some specific challenges that you face?
No, I don't think so. Like, we love how our life works. There's one kid holding one hand each and we can swing her and have an arm spare. I think it's definitely a lot calmer than it probably would be if there was two. We're probably the happiest that we could be because of that. We both have quite demanding jobs, so it's great that when we're not at those jobs, we can give her that focus. So to me, no. I think sometimes people think, oh, if you just have one, well, that's easier. You're not even really, it's parenting light, but it's definitely not. You're still got all the same, meltdowns or 4 a.m. wake ups and the same love and the same fun and all the things. So you are kind of fully in it. But I've heard someone describe it as having one child is an accessory and two is a lifestyle.
Oh, wow. Okay. Funny and also,
yeah, which I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it, but I definitely think that's a funny way to look at it. But it does definitely feel to us like it strikes that beautiful balance. Like we get to have a child and see the joy of that, but we're not overwhelming ourselves and overstimulated and stretched beyond our means and our capability. So feels like a good spot for us.
I think a balance, I mean, not knowing myself, obviously being child free, but I feel like that's a really nice way of framing it. I feel like I probably know what you're going to say, but I've heard people say it's kind of almost like being child free, like having one child. Like if you're not sure you want to have kids, just have one. And I've always thought, I don't know, it still kind of seems like having kids to me because you still have a kid. Would you say it's closer to being child-free or closer to having multiple children?
I definitely think it is closer to having multiple children than it is to not. If I look at my life before versus now, it is very, very different. But I do think it is that, sweet spot, but the sweet spot is different for everyone. The sweet spot could be none. The sweet spot could be 10. I see people do that and just think that is amazing that you feel joy and fulfillment from that. I truly do think it is incredible, but I know that wouldn't be the case for me. I absolutely love kids and I love all of my friends' children and I love being able to give them that time as well when my own child is around. So I would say it is definitely not like having none. It is still
say that.
It is still the juggle. It is still, as I was saying, the wake ups in the middle of the night. It is still the worry and the heart outside your body. It's still being asked to stand up 500 times when you've just sat down. It's a lot, but it's also a lot of lovely things as well. But
very cool.
My long-winded way of saying it's not like having none.
I kind of didn't think so, but I do think it could be that right balance, as you say, that sweet spot for some people.
For some people,
I definitely think, in my case, if I would have had kids, it would have been kid. And interestingly, it wasn't like I seriously floated the idea with my husband, but of course the initial response were those sort of stereotypical views of like, oh no, we can't just have one kid and then they have to have a sibling. And then which I wish I knew now what I knew. I don't wish I would have made a different decision, but I wish I could have countered that better in the sense that I now know that. And can you confirm that as well from what, you've read, and I know you've talked to some experts, that a lot of these ideas we have about only children are patently false?
Yeah, absolutely. I spoke to an expert for the piece that we did with you, and then another personal story I did about having an only child and kind of the assumptions that people made. And a lot of the research shows that the kind of happiest, most well-adjusted children are children in families of one or two. That the outcomes are the same. So the social outcomes, the academic outcomes, all of that ends up the same and then drops slightly for every additional child, which, I mean, every child is so different anyway, but there's been no research to say that children who come from a family where they're the only child are any worse off socially, academically, emotionally, any of the markers. So that was very reassuring for me when I spoke to her to know that information. I wish I could remember her name because she was a wonderful expert, but I will send you her details.
Yeah, let's link to it in the show notes of today's episode. And I wish I could remember her name as well. I'm like checking my like open browser tabs because I was Googling her yesterday and I'd not heard of her. And I thought, oh, she could be an interesting researcher as well. Or I guess a recent interesting guest, I should say, with the research she's done. So, and it sounds like it was also her foray into this area is because she also has an only child and was kind of curious about these outcomes and whatnot. So
yeah, absolutely. So she wanted to know whether, these old school beliefs that children would be worse off were true, and all of that was proved to be very incorrect. So that was great to know, and very reassuring to us that our choice was okay.
Yeah. Well, it definitely is, but it's like, I mean, I know it's the same with people who are thinking about that child-free path. I mean, if I've had researchers on saying, child-free people also can live very fulfilled, meaningful, happy lives. It's like having that additional kind of comfort and reassurance from the research, the numbers, can be nice. I think.
Absolutely. I'm sure the stress levels alone would be so much better if you didn't have a child to worry about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm sure there's research that's been done on like stress, but it's funny that we seem very fixated on like happiness and satisfaction, which I get that we want to have happy, satisfied lives, but there's like so many different sort of metrics upon which we can base our lives, right? For some people, it's more about having a breadth of experience, or it's about having meaning. And not to say that having a child or children is the only way to have meaning in your life, but I think asking ourselves more like what will bring about those experiences or feelings I want to have versus just saying, happiness, kind of that's the goal, could be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
On the topic of happiness, would you say you're happier now than you were before having kids, or more fulfilled now? And by the way, yes is totally a fine answer. I'm just curious how you view that.
That's so interesting. That's an interesting question. I've never actually thought about it. I think I feel a level of joy that I never thought I would feel from being with my daughter and parenting my daughter. So in that way, absolutely. But I also had a wonderful life before, to travel without thoughts of logistics, to work and be able to focus on work, which are still things I get to enjoy now, but it obviously just comes with a few complications. But I take those complications very happily for her. So, I would say I was happy in different ways. And I can see that if our path had gone differently and our daughter never happened, that we could have still had amazing, fulfilled lives together, doing all of the things we were doing then and bringing in other things into our life. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's always such a like wonderful, healthy viewpoint to have. And it's, I mean, this is a big objective with this podcast, is to bring nuance into the fact that like, it doesn't just have to be one or the other, that one decision's good versus bad or right or wrong. And it's always a beautiful reflection from people who say, yeah, of course, there's a depth of joy and meaning. That it's not to like take that away from anyone, but also to say I could have had a good, fulfilled life without it. And maybe it would have shifted and looked different than the way I had been living. Not to say that was bad, but what I'm hearing from you is maybe you would have then done other things instead of having kids. Or do you have ideas about what that might have
Yeah,
looked like?
I always joke to my husband that we would have
Yeah.
just had really nice white furniture,
Yeah.
and probably a few dogs,
Yeah.
and travelled a lot more, maybe, or
Yeah.
been further in our careers, maybe.
Yeah.
Who knows, what would have happened there? But I definitely think that would have been okay
Yeah.
if that's the way things had gone. I obviously am very glad that it did work out. I would never change what we have with our daughter, but
Of course.
yeah, I can definitely see that if that path had been the one for us, it still would have been great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm interested on the topic of your husband. Does he field similar comments or questions about having one child, or like that, oh, you should have more? Do you know, when the guys are standing around at a party, like, obviously big stereotype there, you know, beside the Barbie.
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
is, do people make comments to him as well? Or does it feel like mostly you who's fielding those comments?
He definitely does get the comments, but I
Yeah.
would say they're more, which is kind of a good that they are more from an older generation, I would say, that probably
Okay.
feel quite entitled or whatever the word is to kind of say it openly to us. So I would say it's more people around my parents' age that will say things
Yeah.
to both of us. Whereas people our own age are a bit more discerning or kind of understanding that there could be other factors at play, that they don't know whether we could or whether we
Yeah.
what our choices were and what our reasons were, for not having a second. So he definitely does get it, and he kind of does get a bit frustrated by that too, like I do. But I do think, and I don't know whether this is just men and women in general, but I do think he doesn't probably feel the guilt in the same way. But I
Yeah.
think that is just classic mum guilt of overthinking things that I don't need to overthink. Whereas he kind of looks at it as what's in front of us. And he's like, look at
Yeah.
her. She's great. She's happy. She doesn't care. So why do we care? Why are we
Yeah.
worrying about this? What we've got is good. So I think he's a bit more matter of fact about it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it definitely does. We both have thoughts about it, and we'll both have days, and it's generally not the same day as each other, but we'll have days where one of us will be like, oh, maybe we should, maybe we should. Um, but then it always kind of comes back around to
Yeah.
no, why
Yeah.
are we messing with it? And if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
It's we're lucky to have what we have, and being journalists, you do hear your fair share of horror stories as well about pregnancy, about birth, about all sorts of things that can happen. And that probably does play in as well, that we do have our eyes wide open to how lucky we are to have
Yeah.
what we have and not wanting to push our luck almost.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious. You mentioned having had a traumatic birth and difficult postpartum period. How much do you think that plays a role in not wanting to have more children?
I do think it probably played more of a role in the earlier days postpartum than it
Mm-hmm.
does now. I think now I can kind of look at it with a bit more of a bird's eye view. It's a bit further in the review mirror for me to be able to see it for what it was. But yeah, like I definitely think it does. It is a factor. I wouldn't say it's the main factor, but it definitely is a factor. Because thinking about going through that process again, having the stress that we had. My daughter had low placental fluid, low growth, so there was
Mm.
she came out really tiny and was in special care for a while as well. So the thoughts of the risks involved in that, they definitely have played a part, but as time's gone on, I've tried to see it less from like a fear-based
Yeah.
choice. Like, am I just doing this because I'm scared something will go wrong? And it's part of it, but it's not all of it.
Yeah.
No.
Well, and it's also okay to make that decision from that place of fear, because you did have something scary happen, and there is of course risk with childbirth. And so, but
Yeah.
I also, what I'm hearing is, yeah, it's part of it, but it's definitely not the entirety. And it sounds like there's a lot of joy in your triangle family.
Yeah, yeah. And I just like, I think it would be silly for me to just go, oh, well, it would be totally fine. Like, it's
Yeah.
silly to think of it. It might not. Like,
Yeah,
it very well
absolutely.
might not be totally fine.
Yeah.
The same thing could happen again. We don't know. We don't know why it happened
Hmm.
that I had low placental fluid and that her growth stopped. We don't know any of those things. I had to be in hospital for a couple of weeks before I had her for
Hmm.
monitoring because of all of that. So it very well could happen again, or something else totally different could happen again. That's
Yeah.
just the nature of pregnancy and birth. And I think it's also, and I think this is the same for people who choose to be child free,
Hmm.
is if you are content with the situation you have
Yeah.
now, I think you would have to have a very strong urge to want to change it.
Yeah.
In my opinion,
Yeah.
I would not. I don't feel and have never felt a strong enough urge to change the current situation.
Yeah.
So, and I feel like if we're happy with this and we're happy with the choices we've made, why would I do that based off
Yeah.
a what if or a it'll probably be fine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the last questions I want to ask you is what's sort of your relationship with that little part of you that thinks, what if we did have another? You know, the 3 a.m. staying awake, the wondering or worrying, or even that desire that like, oh, this could be a lovely, experience to have. How, like, do you want to, or will you just live with that? I guess I'm just interested in your relationship with doubt, because I think
Yeah.
that doubt and not knowing is such a big part of no matter what decision we make. So how do you see that?
Yeah. I think the more I look at it, I think it's because I don't want to, like, I know intellectually, I know that there will probably be times in the future we will look and maybe be sad about it. That
Yeah.
might be a very small sadness,
Yeah.
that we might go, oh, that would have been nice. Or I wonder what if we'd had a second child. I wonder if it would have been a boy
Mm,
or a girl, or what they would have looked like. I think there's always wonder about the path you don't take,
yeah.
regardless of what that is. But I would rather wonder and think about it in fondness than go down a path that I didn't feel was the right one in my gut, and
Mm-hmm.
then be in that situation thinking, I want to go back. And
Yeah.
I know I would never regret another child once they're here, but I think you could feel like, oh, life might have been a bit easier if we
Yeah.
didn't do this.
Yeah.
I would never want to feel that. But I'm sure, if something happened unexpectedly and a second came into our lives, then we would love them. Like, I'm sure we would. But
Yeah.
that's kind of where I get the peace from with it, is that I don't feel that strong yearning. And to me, unless
Yeah.
it's a definite yes, it's a no. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, what are you doing? You have to
Yeah.
trust your gut and your feelings on it. And I'm a very indecisive person, on most things, but this has always kind of, as I said to you, I've doubted and I've questioned, but I
Mm-hmm.
almost think I've just been doing that because that's what I do with everything else. I don't think it's ever actually, it hasn't ever moved over to
Yeah.
yes, let's have
Yeah.
another, let's do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of how I am with it, knowing it will
Yeah.
probably always be there to
Yeah.
wonder in some small way, but I think we'll be content with the decision we've
Yeah.
made. Yeah.
I find it super beautiful how you've allowed and made space for this wondering and this what if. And I agree, it's totally a part of life. And hearing you describe so much of your situation, minus the part where it's like, no, it's definitely having kids. Like it's quite clear. But a lot of what you share, and specifically just what you talked about with the wonder, is so similar to the relationship with I have with this possibility that I could have been a mom. It's like,
Yeah.
it's more this place of like, I don't expect that there will never be sadness. I'm okay having that curiosity, and I see it as a curiosity of, what would have been like, as opposed to a devastation or like, oh my God, regret, I've made the wrong choice. And I think just having allowance and knowing it's okay not to be, 100% affirmative, in one direction, for there to be a part of yourself that thinks, oh, that would have been interesting. I don't know. We have so much trouble with that for some reason, like
Yeah,
sort of
I think
culturally, if you will.
curiosity is a really good way to put it. Like
Yeah.
it's not regret, or I hope it won't be regret.
Yeah.
I think it will be just curiosity, wondering
Yeah.
what if. But I think you feel that with so many things.
Totally.
What if I did go for that job, or what if I'd spoken to that guy,
Yeah.
like then people have all those curiosities about all
Yeah.
different things in their life. So that one will be ours.
All right. Well, before we wrap things up, I have 5 rapid fire questions that I ask all of my guests, and I'm actually
Oh,
going to put a little spin on it, the couple of the questions, particular to your situation. So the
okay.
first 2 are finish the sentence. Being a mom of one is,
Oh, wonderful. I love it.
being a mom of one, that's a mouthful. Being a mom of one is not.
Not overwhelming.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is one tool or resource that you think might help someone who, let's say, has one child and is thinking, like, do I want more or not? It might not be our full audience, but I'm curious in case we've got listeners.
Oh, one resource, did you say?
Yeah, or a tool, or like even just like a framework for thinking this through.
Mm. I think it would probably just be what I said before. Like, if you're not sure on it being a yes,
Mm-hmm.
to me, that's a no.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I think of it
Yeah.
with everything. Either jump right in and be
Yeah.
sure that that's what you want to do, or look at other options that would make you
Yeah.
feel that feeling of
Yeah.
confidence in your choice.
Yeah. What is one thing that you would like child-free women to know?
I think what I would like them to know is that in my situation, even if you have one, then you're still questioning yourself. So I think that it would be very normal, even if you've made the decision that you're going to be child free, to then still be questioning and wondering, because
Yeah.
I am doing that. My friends who have 2 are doing that about 3. My friends who have 3 children are doing that about whether they should have had a 4th, or what that 4th child would be like. So I think there is always something to question, something to
Yeah.
doubt yourself on, and something that will always be unanswered, whichever level you're at.
This is
So,
so good. Keep going. I love what you're sharing here. Sorry to cut you off.
no, no, not at all. That's lovely to hear. Yeah, I think that that's the case, that that you will never fully know, and that's part of the journey of it. So you've just got to go with what your gut is telling you is right for you.
Yeah. Okay. And on that topic of your gut, maybe this is what would your answer be. But if you could give a piece of advice to someone who's on the fence about whether to have kids or stay child free, what would that piece of advice be?
Oh, it's so hard. It's
It
so
is.
hard to decide. I guess what I would say is to just think about whether you're doing it for the right reasons. Like I think it would be if you've got that yearning there to have a baby, they're not a baby for very long. So have you got that yearning to have that person in your life that you will eventually, if you do your job right, they will leave you and go
Yeah.
off into the world and do something else. So it can't be kind of about creating someone for yourself who's never going to leave and who's never going to let you down and who's never going to annoy you, because they will do all of those things at some point. So I think it's just making sure that you're not doing it for that reason.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think you can have a wonderful life. I mean, it's easy for me to say when I've got a child, but I can see how you could have an equally wonderful life without children. So um, just try and look inwards at what feels like the right decision, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you. That's great advice. Okay, so how can people connect with you, Stacey, if they want to reach out or see your writing? Well, of course, link to the article about being a mom of an only child and with this expert.
Yeah. Yes, yes. Yeah, if you want to read more about my ramblings on everything from Dubai chocolate to
Yes,
being a mum of one child, then at mamamia.com.au. And I'm on Instagram at Stacey A. Hicks as well.
perfect. Okay. We will link to both those places in the show notes. So
Amazing.
People can easily find you and share any feedback on this episode and check
Yes.
out your amazing writing and all the articles at Mamamia, which I was under the assumption that it was just a publication for moms. But I mean, it's, as you said, it's become Australia's biggest women's media outlet today. Is that right?
Yes. Our mantra is to make the world a better place for women and girls. So every bit of content we're doing, whether that's for your entertainment, for your education, to kind of connect with other people, it's always with that in mind. So it's a lot of wonderful content, and I'm so lucky I've gotten to speak about this topic and speak to you about choosing to be child-free as well, because we want to kind of represent all the choices women can make, and what that can look like for other people, because we find, especially, this is storytelling, like women connect through storytelling and talking about their own experiences, whether that's podcasts or articles. So yeah, that's why I love it.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, I love hearing that. It's always so inspiring to speak with someone who really enjoys the work they do and who, it's bigger than just that. It's like really a, whether it's a passion or a calling or some sort of vocation. It sounds like there's, and just following you on Instagram, by the way, it looks like you have a lot of fun at work as well. So
yeah, it's a good place. It's a great place to work. Yeah,
fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Stacey. I'm really grateful to have been able to have this really in-depth conversation. I'm sure there's many more things that can be said, but about this choice to have one child, and I'm super happy for you and your triangle family.
Thank you. I'm super happy for you with your beautiful dogs and your partner.
Thank you. If you have found this conversation or any of the other episodes of the Kids or Child-Free podcast helpful, insightful, if this podcast has created some small or large shift for you that has helped you with your kids or child-free decision, I want to ask you to please leave a rating or a review in either Spotify on the Spotify app or Apple Podcast app. This is such a small, simple, quick thing for you to do that can create really big impact in terms of helping this podcast to get discovered by more listeners and help more people who are on the fence with this decision. So again, before you go about your day or listen to another episode, hit pause, leave a rating or a review, again, in-app, whether you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and know that both I will be very grateful, as well as all of those people who will be discovering this podcast thanks to your rating or review.